Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you all here today to the TUV Reform UK manifesto launch. As everyone knows, the TUV tells it as it is. Whilst others engage in spin and say one thing in February only to say the complete opposite in June, in an attempt to gain credibility for an election in July, the TUV is consistent and forthright. You know where you stand with the TUV. We are, as the sign in this lectern declares, the party you can trust. That's why today we are launching a manifesto entitled Restore the Union. Others may play down the significance of a border in the Irish Sea. TUV Reform are unashamedly unionists. And with the courts finding that a critical pillar of that union, Article 6 indeed of the Acts of Union, which guarantee freedom of trade within and between the nations of the UK, the Act of Union is in suspension because of the protocol, and restoring the Union is what this party is all about. With our link up with Reform UK, TUV has proven that we are not an insular Ulster nationalist party. I want to extend an especially warm welcome to the Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Mr Ben Habib, candidate for Wellingborough and Rushden, who is no stranger to this part of the world, who has been an unequivocal opponent of the protocol and a great ally to unionists here in Ulster who mean what they say. We'll hear from Ben later on, who will speak about some of the policies that our two parties hold in common. But before we hear from Ben, I would like us to take a few minutes to watch a video which will go out across Reform UK platforms today, underscoring the nationwide issue of the protocol. Thank you.
My name is Dan Boucher and I'm the TUV Reform candidate in the Belfast South and Mid Down election here in Northern Ireland. But this is a general election message to people living in England, Wales and Scotland. Brexit has only been granted to England, Wales and Scotland. Before Brexit, we all suffered from the democratic deficit, the difficulty resulting from the fact that notwithstanding our representation in the EU lawmaking processes through the Council of Ministers and European Parliament, we could on occasion be overruled by the rest of the EU. We were not in fact in control of our destiny. Brexit was partly about taking back control, so we could not be overruled. But Northern Ireland has been denied Brexit, and in a way that rather than taking back control, gives much more of it away, and in a manner that places the integrity of the United Kingdom in jeopardy. As a result, the Windsor Framework, we in Northern Ireland can no longer stand for election, or elect someone else, to make our laws in some 300 different areas. These are made for us by the EU, even though we are not part of the EU. The problem is not that there is a deficit in the democratic process attending the development of these laws, but there simply is no democracy. Northern Ireland, part of the United Kingdom, has effectively become an EU colony. The failure of the UK government to negotiate a departure from the EU that, rather than keeping the integrity of the UK citizenship intact, foists second-class citizenship on the people of Northern Ireland so we can no longer stand for election to make the laws to which we are subject in some 300 areas, constitutes the most monumental failure of UK statecraft for centuries. It does not just damage Northern Ireland, but the United Kingdom as a national community and its standing in the world. Northern Ireland has made extraordinary sacrifices for our country. It was, for example, the first place in Europe to receive US troops preparatory to D-Day, and the Royal Ulster Rifles was the only regiment to send in 2 battalions on D-Day to secure the restoration of democracy in Europe. How extraordinary then that the EU, led by France and Germany, should now single out Northern Ireland for the unique humiliation of mass disenfranchisement. How extraordinary that the UK government should have agreed to this. Those of us who live in England, Wales and Scotland can look the other way and try to ignore the appalling way in which Northern Ireland has been treated by the EU and the UK government, or we can face up to the great injustice committed against them, and thus the United Kingdom as a whole. I was so troubled by this injustice that I moved from Wales to live in Northern Ireland, to take a stand against this injustice. While not asking you to move house, I would ask you to vote for Reform UK, the only UK party standing in this general election committed to putting our country back on a stable and secure foundation without the Irish Sea border, the only party committed to the restoration of full UK citizenship to the people of Northern Ireland, and the only UK party committed to requiring that the EU, its member states, and the rest of the international community respect the territorial integrity of the United Kingdom. Please vote for the restoration of our country on the 4th of July. Please vote for Reform UK.
At this juncture, I would now like to introduce our party deputy leader and candidate for Strangford, Mr. Ron McDowell, who is going to outline our manifesto position on social values, life and family, protecting women's rights and fundamental freedoms. Ron.
Thank you, Matthew, and it's good to see everybody here this morning. I'm particularly glad to see our friend Ben back with us again, supporting our position here in Northern Ireland. A great friend to TUV and a great friend to Northern Ireland per se. I only have a couple of notes written down on a little bit of paper here, but you may be forgiven for thinking that this is actually the Sinn Féin manifesto. When we've seen that and the lack of substance that there was in the Sinn Féin manifesto a few days ago, a manifesto that contained very, very little. And when I was thinking of manifestos, I was thinking, could this be the DUP manifesto? But then you wouldn't be able to believe a word in it, would you? So it's not the DUP manifesto either, and nor is it the Alliance manifesto, for we see by their behaviour that perhaps their manifesto is the Sinn Féin manifesto in secret. But nonetheless, I'm confident that we here in TUV have a manifesto that you can stand on, a firm foundation for Northern Ireland, and a manifesto that's rock solid on the issues that matter. And we're very happy to put this before the electorate going forward. But Northern Ireland is a change in place. The UK is a change in place. And woke issues are coming to the fore. And there are woke issues that are now prominent in politics. So I want to present to you the TUV that you'll recognise. The TUV as a moderate party, as a voice of rationale, as a voice of calmness, as a voice of balance, as a party of love and kindness, and a party of compassion. Now, that's the TUV that the press quite often portray, isn't it? And I want to spell it out to you here now as we're talking about woke policies based on our Constitution. Society's changing, and there are changes in society. TUV have been consistent in their position on abortion. Today, we stand exactly where we have always stood. We're opposed to abortion. And where we see abortion going today with the calls for full-term abortion, then TUV are a party of moderation. And we say we don't want full-term abortion. The UN rights for the right of the child is fundamental and starts off with the right to life, the UN resolution. With a voice of rationale, we hear calls coming in today for euthanasia. And where does that ultimately take you in life? Well, I can point then to Mark Langmark, who was killed for being an alcoholic, who had his life taken from him for being an alcoholic. Alistair Hamilton, who went into surgery in Switzerland and had his life taken from him because he wanted to, had no known medical illness. And so we're a party of rationale when it comes to such issues. We're a party of love and kindness. We respect the right of children to live a child's life. We resist the implementation of RSE into the schools, and we also resist gender ideology as it's put out amongst children. The TUV stand as a party of love and kindness. We don't condone giving puberty blockers to children. We stand against such things, and we stand for the rights of the family on a firm foundation where we've always stood. We also stand fairly and squarely with equality. We see perhaps the balance of a woke police force, of woke services, We know that the Pride Parade, for example, is a political campaigning for specific issues that are important to them. We successfully argued against the police involvement in such things. We should have a balanced police force, him representing everybody and not one section of the community. So these are things that we believe in. We're not howling into the wind or howling into the sky, but we stand fairly and squarely with balance. We're a party of moderation, of compassion, a voice of rationale, a party of balance, and a party of love and kindness. Society's changing. It doesn't always change for the better, and TUV stands fairly and squarely with the family. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ron. We're now going to move to our party leader, a man that needs no introduction, and that is our party leader, Jim Allister, and our candidate in North Antrim.
Thank you very much, Matthew. It's great to get to this stage in the campaign of launching our manifesto. And as you've already heard, Traditional Unionist Voice is a party which unapologetically is a unionist party, and given the threat to our union, it should be no surprise that the restoration of the union is our overriding concern in this election. Sadly, our union with Great Britain has been splintered. It has been splintered by, of course, the iniquitous protocol. A splintering which is set to increase in the coming year with the further aspects of the customs border unfolding in October right through to next July. A union which has been splintered by a partitioning border in the Irish Sea, premised upon the fact that Northern Ireland is proclaimed by the protocol not to be British territory, but to be EU territory. Hence, the requirement of EU law to check the goods coming from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. A union that, in consequence, has seen Article 6 of that foundation of the very union, the Acts of Union, according to our Supreme Court, in consequence, in suspension. And a union where this part of this kingdom is ruled in significant degree, not by local laws, not by UK national laws, but by foreign laws made by a foreign parliament covering 300 areas of law that have been removed from democratic control and accountability by the people of Northern Ireland. And that, of course, touches upon the very fundamental issue of sovereignty. And the basic problem of the protocol is that it amounts to the surrender of sovereignty over a part of the United Kingdom to that foreign jurisdiction. And that is the most egregious constitutional affront to our supposed position as an integral part of the United Kingdom. And in no small part to seek to remedy that, we have entered into our agreement with Reform UK, a national party of growing influence and impact across this United Kingdom. And of course, the strength of that party on this fundamental issue of the Union is epitomised by the stand of our special guest today, Ben Habib. I've often referred to him as our adopted Ulsterman, because this is a man who, faced with the protocol and all its union dismantling aspects, stood strong, stood tall, and did much more than many of our own elected politicians within Northern Ireland. And this province will forever be in the debt to Ben Habib for his steadfastness and his unwavering support, because he cares, as we care, about Northern Ireland's place within the Union. And of course, we are now the only party with such an alliance on a pan-UK basis, which can only be for the good and the strengthening of our union. Now, this is a manifesto which is centred on the reunification of the United Kingdom. As we've already said, our union has been splintered. It needs to be reunified. So our thrust and our purpose is the reunification of the United Kingdom. And only when the foundations are right can you build stable and lasting structures. And in any building, it's the foundations that matter the most. In any renovation project, such as this is, to reinstate and reunify the United Kingdom, the foundations are critical. And so, just to draw out that analogy, if you were engaging a builder to renovate what was wrong with your house, you'd want to be sure that he did a good job. You'd want to be sure that he has secured your foundations. And one who makes you false promises is not a builder you would keep or a builder you would want to continue to engage. And so it comes, so likewise it comes to the restoring of our union. We have the greatest affliction in our structure of the dry rot of the Irish border, which is diminishing and dismantling our union. And a fundamental and inescapable prerequisite for any people-politician relationship is that of honesty. Without honesty, there can be no return of trust from people to politician. Without trust, that link, that contract, is irreparably broken. And that, of course, is why the DUP in this election is in difficulty, because by their own hand, they lied to the people of Northern Ireland. In the last election, the DUP was awarded the contract to restore the union. Trust was placed in them to do that job. But they have failed lamentably. But worse, they lied about it. The Donaldson deal will forever stand as the greatest contrivance of lies and deception ever attempted on the unionist people. It changed not one word of the protocol. Yet it was brazenly sold as having demolished the Irish Sea border, having neutered EU law, having restored our place within the United Kingdom. Each of those Donaldson-Robinson claims were false. There is no escaping from that. And their subsequent admission of that leaves the DUP as having shredded its own credibility and as having forfeited the right and entitlement to be trusted ever again by unionist voters. if you cannot be trusted on the most fundamental issue, which is the assault upon our union by an Irish Sea border and subjection to foreign laws, if you're prepared to mislead and try to hoodwink voters on that, then you've irretrievably forfeited the trust of those you tried to hoodwink. And now, to add to that dishonesty, we have had the rudderless flip-flopping of the last week, which came in the Assembly with this screeching U-turn on EU law and the DUP's previous embrace of access to the EU single market. In contrast to this Groucho Marx offering of the DUP, these are my principles. If you don't like them, I have others. In contrast to that stands the steadfastness of TUV and our colleagues. We do not wilt. We do not wobble. U-turns are not our thing. Conviction, not expediency, is our guide. So in this election, trust is rightly the defining issue for many. Those who in February falsely claimed that the Irish Sea border was gone, that EU law was thwarted, that our place had been restored in the United Kingdom, do not deserve your votes in February. And that is why I am delighted to be able to offer in this election the contrasting and unshakable unionism of TUV Reform UK. It's time to build back what has been lost. It's time to build back what has been squandered by those who previously they were entrusted to deliver, but those who failed miserably and left unionism in a much worse position than they found it. The DUP stewardship of the union has not just been woeful, it has been damaging. And our union has never been in a more perilous state than it is today. The challenge of building back is daunting. There is no doubt about that. But with truth on our side, and with the help of men of principle like Ben Habib, we will not falter. That is our pledge to the people of Northern Ireland. And on that note, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Ben to our conference today. And because he is that steadfast constancy in the political place in Northern Ireland. I'm also delighted to see Baroness Hoey with us today, and to wish her on this special day a happy birthday. But for now, I welcome Ben.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I think that is a very important place to start. Happy birthday, Kate. Thank you very much for having me here today, Jim, and thank you all for your very kind words of welcome. Even though when I land at Belfast Airport, I'm no longer the first-class citizen that I am in London because of the diminished rights that we experience as British citizens when we fly from London to Belfast. I'm always uplifted when I come to Northern Ireland. I absolutely love this part of the United Kingdom. And I just want to reiterate that we haven't got Brexit. How could we have had Brexit when we voted for the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland to leave the European Union? It was a very simple question, folks. Do we want to leave the EU? No one voted for 2 more treaties with the European Union. No one voted for a border down the Irish Sea. No one voted for trade laws, state aid laws, VAT laws, excise duty laws, and even human rights laws in Northern Ireland to be different from those in Great Britain. No one voted to create a specific repository for illegal migrants in Northern Ireland, protecting them from the Rwanda. I mean, I laugh when I consider Rwanda, because of course Rwanda's nonsense. But the notion was that we would be able to deport people from Great Britain to Rwanda, but you can't deport them from Northern Ireland. Why not? Because of the Northern Ireland Protocol, Windsor Framework, safeguarding the Union, whatever you want to call it. And the duty had fallen to the biggest political party in Northern Ireland to protect the Union. That was their first and foremost obligation, the DUP's obligation to protect Northern Ireland, to fight the protocol. And that was the assurance that Sir Geoffrey repeatedly gave me in the many meetings I had with him. But they eventually took the knee to the protocol, and they lied about it, just like Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak have lied about it. And the situation is actually getting worse. I'm not sure if you're aware, but in April 2025, checks are going to be introduced for goods not just coming from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, but for goods moving from Northern Ireland to Great Britain. Do you remember that Prime Minister who was caught on camera saying, if you're presented with any paperwork for goods moving from Northern Ireland to Great Britain, give it to me, I'm going to put it in the bin? Do you remember that clip? Well, it's going to be proven to be false. But how is it? How is it that our political class that is elected to represent the British people, to protect our territorial integrity, to promote British interests, to promote the interests of British citizens, how is it that our political class could have partitioned the United Kingdom without even telling the truth about what was going on? And I'll tell you what the reason is. It's this. We have a uni-party in Parliament. People like to talk about the Labour Party being left-wing and the Conservative Party being right-wing. It's a complete misdescription of these two parties. Both parties are globalist. Both parties, and this is a charitable interpretation of the way that they govern, both parties see the prosperity of the United Kingdom through a global prism. They don't care about national interests because they think they can deliver something on a global basis. Rishi Sunak never looks happier than when he's wearing a Hawaiian shirt alongside his mate Emmanuel Macron wearing an equally stupid-looking shirt, all grinning at each other at the G7. That's how they get their personal validation, not from the British electorate. The British electorate are merely an inconvenient stepping stone in order to get into office. Once they get into office, it's the G7, the G20, the EU, the WHO, the WEF, all of that that is of interest to them. And it is because they're both globalists, both parties are globalists, that it's possible for Natalie Elphink, so-called right-wing Tory, to effortlessly cross the floor and sit with the Labour Party, because ideologically they're the same. And if you vote Tory, what you will get is ever more taxation, ever more state intervention, ever more borrowing, ever more turning its back on the British people, ever more regulations. Sounds a bit like Labour, doesn't it? And if you vote Labour, you'll get all of that I've just described, but you just get it faster and worse. And there's only one party in Great Britain that stands for British interests. Only one party that still is wed to the romantic, rather old-fashioned, quaint notion that we should be promoting British interests and protecting the British people, and that is Reform UK. Reform UK's principal foundational building block is the protection, promotion of our country. And our country, in case people have forgotten, is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's one of the most uplifting reads of all time. The People's Contract that we published, our manifesto. It really is 38 pages of absolute pure common sense. And I can't remember the page number that it's on, but in amongst this wonderful document, we declare that we're going to bin the Windsor Framework. And the good news is that doesn't just benefit Northern Ireland. For all those British citizens who are slightly asleep at the wheel in Great Britain, what they should recognise is in the binning of the Windsor Framework, we will actually secure the Brexit we voted for, because the EU will be so upset that we will sever our ties eventually with them. We will take back control of state aid laws. We'll take back control of environmental laws, employment laws, competition law. We will be able to get rid of the European Convention of Human Rights. We will be able, for our military, which, by the way, is also threatened at the moment with EU supremacy, we will be able to put forward our own defences without the interference of a supranational entity that is the European Union. Getting rid of the Windsor Framework is not just for the critically important exercise of reuniting Northern Ireland with Great Britain. It is vital for the United Kingdom as a whole, because until we've got rid of it, we will never be an independent, proud, sovereign, prosperous country. And none of the other policies that Reform UK has in its contract with the people can be implemented if the Windsor Framework stays in place. It has to go. And I want to talk a little bit about some of our policies. At the heart of our approach is a 180-degree change in direction in the way that the country is being governed. And whatever Rishi Sunak says, he's never going to promote the private sector. There was the same Prime Minister who was going to bin all those bits of paper on goods moving from Northern Ireland to Great Britain used a four-letter word in order to describe business. Do you remember that? I'm not going to say it because I'm on mainstream media and all sorts of other channels. But he said something derogatory about business. But I've got news for the British government and for the Labour Party, who are likely to form the next government. The private sector, British businesses, small and medium-sized enterprises, the self-employed, they comprise 96% of our economy. We have to champion them. And it's not about us not being able to afford to cut taxes because of all the profligate government spending, including turning back on cheap North Sea gas and all the damage that that's done. It's not that we can't afford to cut taxes, it's that we can't afford not to cut taxes. We've got to take the foot of the state off the neck that is the private enterprise, private sector in this country. And again, you will be so uplifted when you read our tax policies in Reform UK. So just to give you some of them, we're going to move the £12,500 tax-free threshold from the tax-free threshold of £12,500 per annum to £20,000 per annum. That will take 6 million people out of the tax net. 6 million people are working on a subsistence wage and paying ever greater taxes. And this is the good news for Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. If we run the country, if that policy is implemented, you will take people out of benefits, where they cost us £14,000 per head per annum, and they will start generating taxes for the Exchequer. So when these great independent bodies that adjudicate whether or not policies being put forward are sensible or not, they need to take effect. They need to look at the impact of the changing behaviour of people and businesses in this country when they analyse tax changes and regulatory changes. The benefit, of course, there's a cost of moving people from the threshold from 12,500 to 20,000, but the overall massive benefit is around £20,000 per annum for the Exchequer, because you move people off benefits and into work. The other thing we're going to do, because effectively over the last 30, 40 years, the middle classes have been denuded, and it's critical that the middle classes too can make a fair shake out of their wages. So we're going to move the threshold for the 40% tax rate from £50,000 per annum to £70,000 per annum. And we're going to champion small and medium-sized enterprises. We're going to get rid of business rates for SMEs, and we're going to tax instead online sales by 4%. We're going to get rid of stamp duty for properties below £750,000. Stamp duty is an awful tax because it's a tax on turnover. It prevents people from actually doing things. That's not what you want in your economy. You want more activity. We'll get rid of the iniquitous death tax on estates less than 2 million. At the moment, if you die, if you have, maybe death would be welcome under Keir Starmer's government. But if you die and your estate is worth more than £325,000, a threshold which was set many years ago, you pay tax. We would take all estates up to 2 million out of that tax threshold. It's completely iniquitous that people who saved up over their lives, pay taxes on their money, have to pay a death tax when they die, which is so high. We would get rid of IR35, which has been an absolute noose round the neck of sole traders. We will up the threshold at which corporation tax is paid from up to £100,000 before you even have to declare your corporation tax. And that will remove lots of small businesses, not just from the need to pay tax, but the bureaucracy and form filling that's required in order to pay tax. We will move the VAT threshold from 90,000, which, by the way, we cannot at the moment exceed because of EU regulations through Northern Ireland, binding Great Britain as well. We will move that from £90,000 per annum to £150,000, again liberating small businesses. But the really important tax change that we would make for the United Kingdom, and one that should have been made for Northern Ireland years and years ago, and one that I've been banging on about in the press for the last few years, is the reduction in corporation tax. Rishi Sunak seems to think he can tax his way to prosperity. And some of you may be aware that he signed us into a treaty where we won't, unless the OECD agrees, reduce corporation tax rate below 15%, effectively neutering our ability to be competitive. But Northern Ireland's ability to be competitive on the corporate tax front was neutered many years ago. And Rishi Sunak made it worse when he moved corporation tax from 20 to 25%. And the reason that it's been so damaging for Northern Ireland is because the Republic has a tax rate of 12.5%. So if you're a CEO of a large business and you've got half a brain cell, which I presume you would have as a CEO of a large business, where would you choose to set up your business? Where would you put your headquarters? In Belfast, where you pay 25% per annum as tax? Or would you go to Dublin where you pay 12.5%? Show of hands for anyone who thinks they're going to come to Belfast over Dublin. Of course they're not going to come to Belfast. They've pulled the rug out from underneath the feet of Northern Irish business with this high corporation tax. And even with that incredibly low rate of tax last year, the Republic took £24 billion in revenue out from corporation tax. And the UK took something approaching 70 billion. We're a much bigger economy, and we only took just under 3 times the tax take in the Republic. The Republic is booming because it has a low corporation tax rate. So I'm delighted to say that if Reform UK were to get into office, we would cut corporation tax immediately from 25% to 20%, and then we would cut it again as soon as we could to 15%. And that would help dramatically the fortunes of people living in Northern Ireland. That is roughly our agenda. But I just want to remind people before I finish, the fundamental building block of, I've blown the whole thing away, the fundamental building block of Reform UK's policies are very simple. Make policies for the British national interest. It's really simple. Keir Starmer won't do it. He prefers Davos to Westminster. He doesn't understand what a woman is. He takes the knee to far left, Marxist, anti-democratic movements. The man is unfit to be in Parliament, let alone in office, and Rishi Sunak isn't far off. There's only one party that gets it in Great Britain, and that's Reform UK, and there's only one party that gets it in Northern Ireland, and that's the TUV. And I recommend everyone listening to this, please cast your votes for the TUV candidate if you've got one standing in your constituency. Thank you very much, folks.